writers in our television series, do you all watch television? Do you know what I mean by soap opera? Okay, so you all watch something, a sort of a serialised television drama. It doesn't have to be The Young and the Restless. And in that, the characters are trapped in a very small world. They can't go anywhere. They're stuck with each other. And the only way that they can leave is to leave the show, because we don't have a view outside of the little world in which this thing that we're watching is set, and the small group of characters who make up the storylines. Over the years, characters come and go, but on the whole, the core stays the same. So when they fall out, that can't stay like that forever. It just can't. Can you imagine if two characters fell out with each other on a TV drama, stopped talking to each other, and then that was it? That was what we saw from then on in, them not talking to each other. It would be boring, so we wouldn't see it on television. So the television producers and the writers are forced into laying out the problem in front of us. We get to see both points of view. It's usually very dramatic, involves lots of shouting and screaming and crying and all that sort of stuff. But the problem is laid out very overtly. It's laid right on the table. We can see it all. And because we know all the characters involved, we can see it from everybody's point of view. This is really useful for us because it helps us to understand that all problems have multiple viewpoints. Fallings out always have multiple viewpoints, and we get used to this by watching these dramas. And in fact, they're much better than real life in that sense, because we get these perspectives. But having laid it out on the table, the producers and the writers are forced into making these characters in some way reconcile. They have to, because otherwise the whole show falls apart. The whole show is based on the premise that these characters are interconnected with each other. They can't fall out forever, because we couldn't watch it. And it's not like that in real life. In real life, what happens is we sort of fall out, stop talking, and we just keep going. We don't necessarily feel the need to reconcile again. Or if we do, often we'll form a reconciliation in real life that won't stand up under pressure. It's not real. We sort of sweep a whole bunch of stuff under the carpet, as we say in the UK, or paper over the cracks is another way of putting it. It's not a real reconciliation because, in actual fact, we haven't addressed the actual problem. And so we end up with this bizarre setting where real life is less... Speak, Lord. Real life is much less able to deal with the problems than the pretend serialized drama. And what Jesus gives us here in Matthew 18 is quite severe. We're not used to this. It's quite a severe, but very practical, if a little ruthless, way of dealing with what happens when we fall out. Now, we might look around and say, do you know what, the last time that I fell out with anyone in the church was a very long time ago. And even then, it wasn't a real big falling out. But the trouble is that these things can build up. We know what happens when religious groups don't actually confront the real problems amongst them. What happens is, well, pick any religious group, any point in history. But in our current point in history, we have one particular religious group that are really, really struggling. And it involves things like, at the moment, suicide bombs, terror campaigns, heavy-handed repression, occupying forces. It's really serious stuff. It's what happens when we don't resolve the internal conflicts. Over time, it builds up. Now, that's very far away. You and I see it also every day in the sort of broken relationships of our society, the shattered families and marriages, the feuds between neighbours and areas, and even division within the church. Someone was telling me the other day, very proudly, Bermuda has more churches than any other nation. I'm not massively sure that that's a good thing. I think it says more about our inability to confront division as it does about our commitment to Christ. And the problem that we have in the modern church, it's a problem really of the making of the last 70 years even, perhaps a little bit longer, but not really, pretty much the last 70 years. And it's this making of the church into a group of really nice people. The church contains really nice people. So all the people who weren't sort of naturally very nice, they're not here anymore. You're all lovely. Sometimes I'm even lovely. And what that means is we don't actually like confronting the issues that are between us. We sort of get used to swallowing our anger and our resentment, and we just carry on as if everything's fine, when in reality it is not. Even if we do fall out with someone, it tends not to be that public, and what we do is we just avoid them, we just don't go anywhere near them. And so we just sort of get used to live with this disconnection. And so in the church, and I don't just mean this church, I mean throughout the whole of our nation, and probably throughout the whole of the Western world, we just get used to living with this sort of, we're not really connected. We all turn up occasionally and sit in the same building, but we don't really connect with each other in that deeply loving and wonderful way that is supposed to be the mark of the people of Jesus. The trouble with pretending that everything is all right is we don't get stuff out in the open. We don't do that for fear of fracturing the community publicly or hurting ourselves even further. It's a sort of a cocoon that we put around ourselves that holds us and protects us from having to deal with things. The trouble is that in the church, as in life and as in our families, there are times when toward each other we can be offensive, aggressive, bullying, dishonest, even immoral. And there's nothing good to be found by creating a false reconciliation that doesn't confront real evil. And what we end up with is a church that actually can't tell the difference between I'm a bit upset today because you said something in a way that I took in a particular meaning, even though I might misunderstand you or I wanted to be upset. There's a difference between that and confronting real evil. And we're just not used to it, so we don't know how to deal with it. We don't deal with reconciliation and conflict and confrontation and forgiveness because we don't actually ever put the cards on the table and say, hey, this is where I am. And so Jesus' words to us in Matthew 18 are incredibly powerful. Even the first words that he uses, if another member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault. When was the last time that any of us did that? Go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. It's Jesus' assumption that we will be brave enough and open enough to say, hey, this happened and I wasn't okay with it. Even to be like a soap opera and cry and shout. There is real evil in this world. And if we are not used to being able to work out between us what was just misunderstanding of different cultures, different ways of being brought up, that we said things in different ways. We don't quite word things as we always mean. If we don't know the difference between that and real evil, because all we do is take umbrage and walk off and take our toys away, and then just don't speak to that person again, what are we doing? How are we truly the people of God? Because forgiveness and reconciliation come, and I don't want to go into this too much because that's next week's sermon, but reconciliation happens when we say, this thing did happen, and it did matter. It mattered to me, even if you didn't notice. This mattered to me. And in that, we get the opportunity for the other person to be able to say, oh, I had no idea that the way I spoke had that impact, or the way that I didn't do this thing felt to you, and I'm sorry. Or even to say, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean that, what I meant was this, and you have misunderstood me, at which point I say, I'm really sorry, I didn't mean to misunderstand you, I was just a bit sensitive that day. But at least we get used to it. We get used to this connection, because at the end of that time, we are able to hug and pray together and say, okay, great, now we're much closer than we were before. The confrontation of the problem and making a real reconciliation doesn't bring about a separation. It brings us much closer to get together than we were before. Because such disagreements are had like this. Now, this goes back to something I was told 20 years ago in my marriage preparation with Ruth. Now, I don't know if you've ever heard this. I heard it that once. I've never heard it again. I've certainly never done it. And that is the best way to have an argument. Do you know the best way to have an argument? Somebody? Hold hands with them. Have an argument holding hands. Never done it. You know, I want to say that up front. I love the image. Never done it. But the image of holding hands with someone while we have a disagreement means something really important, which is, I'm not letting go of you because I love you, and at the end of the day, even though I don't feel terribly loving towards you at the moment and wish you'd go away and wish this had never happened, actually, in Christ, I'm not letting go of you. And the resolution of this will not be that we don't talk to each other or that we pretend that everything's okay. The resolution will be that we really love each other. Now, that's tough. That's what Jesus is talking about when he says this. When you go and you speak to that person, this is how you will disagree with them. You will disagree with them by being, first of all, honest, and second, looking for reconciliation. I'm going to come back to that because it's one of the biggest problems that we have in our society today. Jesus' second option is that if you can't get that resolution, you need to take somebody with you. Now, Jesus is not saying, take somebody with you who's going to take your side and together you'll be able to batter the other person down and make them feel terrible and squeeze an apology out of them. That is not what Jesus is saying. Because what Jesus is saying is, actually, there are more sides to this than you understand at the moment. You need to be able to hear each other, and somebody needs to help you to confront the reality of what you're both doing, because it's possible, actually, that you're both wrong. And in ourselves, we need to confront what it is to be imperfect in ourselves, uncomfortable truths that somebody loving outside of our situation will speak with us. Before I come on to Jesus' final instruction to come back to the whole church and to start fracturing relationships in a more permanent way, and there's a reality to that, I want to speak about the problem that we have in our society, and it leaches into the church. And that is the way in which we tend to argue in the contemporary world. And this does come from politics, or at least that's where we see it replicated. Is this idea that we have to win the argument. The way in which reconciliation and resolution comes is I win. As soon as we go into any situation with that mindset, it means that we can no longer hear the voice of God. Because what we're saying is, it's not that I want there to be Christ between us, holding us together in love. It's that I want to feel like I was on top. And as soon as I am the one who comes out looking the best, I'm no longer about God. We need to say that straight up. As soon as I'm the person that wants to win, what I'm talking about is no longer of God. It becomes very difficult when we're trying to win to tell the difference between real evil and my personal opinion. And too many of the conversations that we all hear in the church are on this basis. It's folk coming with a false hurt, a sense of pride that has been damaged, that they want to win. I want to be proved that I was right. I want to feel like I got what I wanted. And I I hear it from the silliest things like prayers and hymns, to the structure of relationships that we have between us and how we speak of God. Seeking to win means that there cannot be reconciliation. As soon as you say that, you go into any situation, whether it's Palestinians and Jews, whether it's Republicans and Democrats, it doesn't make any difference. As soon as we want to win, there's going to be no reconciliation. And we find this all the time in our society here in Bermuda. All the time. What's fracturing our society is this desire to be on the top, to come out looking the best. And it doesn't matter what the fracture is. Now, it could be on something quite large, like the haves and the have-nots, or those whose history is based in oppression and those whose history is based in being the oppressor. It doesn't matter whether it's to do with how long you've lived on this island or whether you have the right to live here. Whatever the fractures are between us, if we're seeking to win, there is no reconciliation. There is no way that anything will come out good of this. Certainly there is no way that anything will come out godly in this. Jesus' call to exclude people from the community is not about one person having won. It is about dealing with the reality of one party refusing to take part in reconciliation. Let me be very clear about that. Jesus is not saying that if the church gathers together and excludes someone from the community, that person was wrong all along. That is not what is being said. That person could have been in the right.